Hello and welcome back to this Damnful Idealistic Crusade. This video will be going over a number of books I picked up in the past month or two since COVID restrictions have started lifting and things have slowly, at least at this point, kind of gotten a little bit more normalized. I started going to our local used bookshops again, just every once in a while, nowhere near as much as I usually do, since, still trying to be cautious and things, still obviously wearing a mask and things like that. But there has been a massive influx of books coming in, and of course, a lot more people looking for things to do at home. And what's better than a brand new to you book that you've either been wanting to read or are really interested in to curl up with? So, as usual, my tastes run primarily to books dealing with media, primarily film biographies, film theory, film history, criticism, and of course, this doesn't count series books, which I will do in a separate video. But there's just been so many, and all of them at absolutely insane cheap prices that, yeah, I'm out of shelf space again. So, figured it's long overdue for making a new video. So, we'll go in rough alphabetical order for subjects to go through the film books first and then get into a few music books, a couple graphic novels, and some other fun stuff. Starting off with the Bees, this is a more recent biography. I did read the really big biography on Marlon Brando a number of years ago. The really big hardcover you see most everywhere, but I don't own a copy of it. But this is from 2008. So this is I believe this is the most modern Brando biography. So this is called Somebody, again from 2008, published by Knopf, and the reviews are pretty good on it. So I've been interested to read a good book on Brando again and again. I had read the other one a number of years ago, but the reviews on this are pretty good. So again, when you find books like this for this cheap and it's pretty nice shape. It's also a nice, very portable softcover edition. I couldn't say no. I should also mention that all of these books came from our local McKay's mega bookstore, which is basically, I like to refer it as the black hole of media because you never know what turns up there. All kinds of fun goodies do, and most of these books were less than $1, if you can believe that. There were some that were, a couple dollars, $3, $4. But for some of these film texts, especially the biographies and some of the specialty press books, I just couldn't believe it. So that's why my shelves have just exploded in the past year or two since I started going there more and more often and really discovered they actually had a specific film section and that I could get books I was really interested in for dirt cheap. So this is another one. This is a biography of Richard Burton, who I'm, of course, obsessed with, as every fan of great actors should be. And this just looked too fantastic for words, so I can't wait to dig into this. The trouble is now finding the time to read all of these, but I've now multiplied my to-read shelf by a large extent. And it's also nice that this is a more recent book. This is also from 2008, so I'm hoping it has a bit of extra detail and historical analysis in there as well. This is another kind of book that I've mentioned before that is definitely a product of a different era, and now in the time of the internet where you can easily look up just about anything, they don't really do big encyclopedias or career books anymore. This is a perfect example of one of those. It's from Citadel Press, like a number of books they've done, or they did, I should say, usually revolving around an actor or actress. So this is a beautiful volume entitled Films of Gary Cooper. This is a 1970 book, but it is really handsomely put together. They gave a sort of aging to the stills on the cover, but when you open this up, like most of these, it's got essentially a miniature biography inside, and all the stills, even though they're black and white, they're beautifully printed. And then it goes through a chronological retelling of his career in Hollywood with, again, wonderful stills. And then when you get to the actual section of his filmography, it literally goes through everything. So every picture is detailed with stills provided where they could. And again, it's a beautiful chronological history. Of course, it's just limited to certain notes on individual films, but the notes are really well put together. And if you're a fan of Coop, or if you stumble across one of these books and it's one of your favorite actors or directors or actresses or studio personnel, it's really cool to have on the shelf. You can pull it out like a coffee table book. You can leaf through it. And again, it's worth it just for the stills alone. Like, for example, here is the section on the Westerner, the classic 1940 Western. And then they just went ahead and did a whole 2-page spread. See if I can get this all on camera at once. Yeah, it's a whole 2-page spread and just beautifully done. Really nice paper stock as well. So I really enjoy finding these. And again, this was less than $1. So I was like, I really don't need this, but it's so pretty to look at. And I'm trying to get more and more into the I guess I should say the deeper cuts of Cooper and a number of other great actors I'm obsessed with. So that this actually really does help and further entices me to go deeper into his back history of catalog titles, because Coop did so many great films usually most people have never heard of. But I just really love these books, and they're a slice of the experience of film culture, especially in the 70s when it was starting to really take off, and not just be in critical realms, but more and more average people were getting into the idea of classic films, and film culture and film history was becoming more and more apparent. And this would grow in the 80s and 90s, but really it was the 70s where it really started to take off, and you started seeing books like this. This next book I've read several times in library copies. It's essential for anyone who wants to know anything about the movie business, but this is the original hardcover printing. It's in perfect shape, and I'd never owned a physical copy, so even though I think the later versions do have a little bit of added stuff, I'd always meant to own a copy of this and just never had. So I finally picked up, and again, this is a first printing of Roger Corman's autobiography, How I Made 100 Movies and Never Lost a Dime. And he's not really exaggerating there, because, of course, if you know anything about Roger Corman, you know that he could make a movie with some leftover stock, a camera, and like 25 cents in 2 days, and at least get something workable and literally have a released feature done. But it's full of remarkable anecdotes. It's essential for understanding the motion picture business, at that time and in the interim. And of course, Corman also moved into producing, and what is perhaps his most important work outside of his best films is, of course, his shepherding and seeking out of new talents and giving people really their first break. And basically, it became the Roger Corman finishing school, as a lot of people have put it, because you've had there's so many big illustrious names that rose up through the Corman ranks, and of course that includes everybody from Coppola to Scorsese to Joe Dante and a whole lot of other people. So Corman is to be commended not just for being a great figure in film history of the really the he's still going, so you can't really pigeonhole him to anything. You can't just say the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but it's also his continual shepherding of new talent and giving people chances, which also goes to what he would do in seeking out crew members, and also building a tried and true crew behind the camera of people who were not always appreciated for their talents. For example, his usage of the fantastic cameraman Floyd Crosby, and they went on to amazing work on the Poe series, or at least the main chunk of the Poe cycle that Corman is most famous for, and is probably what he's going to be most remembered for in terms of his filmography. But it's a wonderful book. It's really funny and engaging to read. So if you haven't read it, just go ahead and get yourself a copy. But again, there is a later version I think adds it a little bit more. I think that's the version I read, but I just never owned a copy before. And you don't see minty first editions. And the other cute thing was this is actually stamped, and like an idiot, and like what it looks like, you'll think, wait a minute, that's not what I think it is. The original owner, this definitely came away, but I'll show you here. See if you can make that out. So you see Dimension Films was the original owner, and you see California, and you think, wait a minute, that's not like That dimension, no, it is not. I had to look it up. I had to do a little bit of digging. It's actually a different company that existed for a while back in the, I think in the 80s and 90s, but it's not the dimension that you're most likely thinking of. This next one is one I've wanted to read for ages, and I'm a big fan of the author's other biographies. In fact, he's one of my favorite biographers, period. And this is a really nice newer printing from 2013. So this is actually one of his first biographies, and I've read other books on the subject, but I've always wanted to read his. So this is Patrick McGilligan's book on the iconic George Cukor, entitled A Double Life. Again, this is a really nice 2013 reprinting with a nice jacket. It's a nice, easy, portable paperback, but it's got that nice sort of, I never know what you call it, but it's this sort of finish that makes it, it's not the matte, slick finish, but it just feels really nice in the hand. I was completely knocked out when I found this, just sitting there on the shelf mixed in the biographies. So yeah, Cukor is one of the iconic great directors of classic Hollywood and completely underrated. It does not get the credit he so desperately deserves. So I'm really excited to read this. There are a couple other books on Cukor nowadays. I have read one or two of them, and they're pretty good. But I've been wanting to read McGilligan's take because, again, I've absolutely loved his other biographies. Particularly, I've said it before on this channel, but I think his Hitchcock book is the best Hitchcock biography that exists. So that's an essential book, and his book on Nicholas Ray is incredible. Again, essential. Then he also did recently, or in the past few years, he did a book on the early years of Orson Welles, basically leading up to Citizen Kane, which is also excellent. Even coming from me, and I've read every Orson Welles book I can possibly think of or I can get my hands on, and I still thought it was great. So anytime he tackles something, I'm so excited to read it. So I've been wanting to read this for ages and now have a really nice modern printing. So this next one is one of the many books that is written by an assistant or a friend or confidant of a famous individual in their later years, but I didn't know it existed, and it just looks so fantastic that I was like, yes, I'll take it. So this is a book by Betty Davis's assistant from her later years, and it's just a personal memoir about what their working relationship was like and what she was like, particularly in her later years. And I've already skimmed just a little bit, and it's just like this is a lot of fun. So I can't wait to be able to dig through this. Again, these are usually really rewarding in a different sort of way. It's not being a straightforward biography, and it's not trying to be, juicy, gossipy, tell-all or what have you, but sort of giving a different, more personal side to figures you're already well aware of. But again, I didn't even know this existed, and it just looks like a lot of fun. So onto the to-read shelf it goes. I've read this one before. It's a fantastic book, so I was really happy to finally get a copy for my own bookshelf. And this is Michael Dealey's memoirs, which are, of course, called Blade Runners, Deer Hunters, and Blowing the Bloody Doors Off. Michael Dealey, of course, is the famous producer of Blade Runner, The Deer Hunter, and The Italian Job, among many other films. So if you've ever seen all of the wealth of exhaustive materials on the making of Blade Runner, you should be well familiar with the very polite-sounding English gentleman, Michael Dealey. This is really well written. It's a very quick read and just really enjoyable. And if you're a fan of any of those main three films, you will get a lot out of this and enjoy reading the rest of the book. So this is one of my easy recommendations of more modern memoirs, and again, nice to just have a copy finally for my own shelf. I've read a number of the books that Kirk Douglas wrote in his later years, but I hadn't read this one yet, which is My Stroke of Luck from 2002. Again, some of the other ones that I've read, they're really nice, very personal memoirs. And of course, the title referencing his near fatal stroke that really debilitated him to a ridiculous extent. But then his spirit to keep going in spite of all of that. So I really enjoyed reading the other books that I've read. So this one I just hadn't read yet, and it's in a nice volume. It looks almost more like a book of poetry or something. But again, I've really enjoyed reading his other books. So I'm looking forward to reading this one. Next up is a book from the Cinema One series, which was started in the 1970s by Viking. And these are now getting quite collectible because they have their matching spines, and they're usually on people who are not necessarily the most super famous in film and motion pictures, but usually are designed much more for people like myself, the diehards, and are wonderful critical works that are filled with stills and things. And of course, for some of these individuals, these were some of the first really exhaustive, positive works, positive words about their work, So this is volume 15, which is all on Sam Fuller. And they all have this uniform design with the clapperboard motif, and they're all these small paperbacks, but very well bound. And again, these are highly collectible, so you rarely see them pop up used. And then when you do, they usually kind of have a high price tag attached. So it's a full-on critical essay book with a basic sort of career overview and loaded with black and white stills. But I really enjoy reading these when I find them, but most of the ones I've read have been through library copies. And since, they are from the early 70s, you definitely can't find these anymore. And the one I really want to read, the Joel Siegel one on Val Lewton, which was the first really positive book on Lewton that existed. And of course, that one is usually very expensive, and I've never seen a copy, but I just really enjoy these when I find them. So definitely check out the Cinema One series if you haven't yet. Now this one, I just saw it and I'm like, at this point in time, yes, I really want to read this, just because it just jumped out. And of course, the cover automatically does it. So this is Martin Short's autobiography, I must say, from 2014. Hadn't gotten to read this and actually had forgotten about it. I wanted to read it at the time that it came out, but just never got to. So it's always nice when you find cool books like this in the used bookshop and they have the all-important cheap price tag on there. So, it's in pretty nice shape, and I can't wait to dig through this. I've been a fan of Martin Short's pretty much since I can remember, and still feel he's really underrated. So just can't wait to dig into this. And of course, being a big Jimmy Stewart fan, I've read pretty much every Stewart biography there is, and there have been one or two that I've picked up, and I remember this one being pretty good. So I found a copy of the Pieces of Time autobiography. This is from '97. This is apparently a 2009 reprinting, and it's in really nice shape. So again, this was nice to find, and I'm looking forward to rereading this. I can't remember of all the ones that I've read which one was the best overall, because of course with Stewart there's a lot of mythology and a lot of preconceived notions that people have. So it's hard to find a book that goes beyond the same stories that have been told over and over. I remember this one being pretty good, but again, I read this many years ago. I think I read this when I was in middle school, but I'm excited to reread this. And of course, being a gigantic Jimmy fan, I have to have every biography there is. This next one's a little bit beat up, but it was in their bargain section, and I've been wanting to read this for way too long. So this is Bruce Cook's biography of Dalton Trumbo, which was published, I believe, in 2015. And Trumbo being, one of the Hollywood 10 and such an interesting character. And then, of course, they eventually made the biopic about him, which I guess was based on this as its primary source. I'm not entirely sure. That was kind of a mixed bag for me, so it really made me want to go back and finally get a copy of this and read it. And, of course, it's a little rough, but, again, it was in their bargain section, so it was only a quarter. So I was like, okay, I can live with that. It's got some nice stills in here as well. I do really like the shot on the back, just because. But I've always been a fan of Trumbo's, but particularly, obviously I grew up being obsessed with Kubrick and then Spartacus. And if you get the chance to look at the Criterion Special Edition 2-disc DVD set, the secondary commentary where it has bits of Trumbo talking about his feeling on the script drafts and what he was trying to convey in the film and what he felt needed to be improved. I mean, that in and of itself is screenwriting 101. That is a class. That is a textbook for how to write a motion picture screenplay and how to make it effective. So just hearing that and being confronted with that incredible, uh, enlightening bit of material directly from Trumbo, it just made me even more fascinated with him as a writer and just as a character. So I'm really excited to finally be able to read the biography. And again, he did so many films and then never really got credit for them until obviously many years later after the fall of the blacklist and things. But then there were other films that most people were unaware that he worked on. So there have been films that I saw and then years later figure out, oh well, that's why the story packed more of a punch than I expected, because he actually wrote it or wrote on it or rewrote it without credit. So yeah, Trumbo is a central character in the Hollywood of the 50s and 60s, and this looks like a really rewarding tome. And this is another person, or that if there's a book or an essay or anything on them, I have to read it. I just have to. It's just automatic. So this is a biography from 1996, which is entitled Wilder Times, of course, about the legend Billy Wilder. And of course, this was written while he was still alive because, of course, it was several years before his passing. So that also gives it a slightly different tonality than, say, a biography written now. But there's not a whole lot of Wilder books. There's a number of pretty solid biographies. I remember Ed Seekoff's On Sunset Boulevard was the best one, which I still need to get a physical copy of that because I grew up reading the library copy. But I've never, I think I've read part of this before, I think from a library, but I don't think I've read the whole thing. So this will be fun to check out. And very nice photo section in the middle on nice glossy paper. And if you're not a Wilder obsessive already, if you're not into Billy Wilder at all, I don't know what you're doing with your life, because I think it was not only a genius but the funniest man who ever lived, and really, I guess you could say, picked up the glove that was thrown by Lubitsch in terms of the elevating of the comedy form into a rich souffle with the Lubitsch touch. And Billy Wilder kind of took that, being a real disciple of Lubitsch, and elevated it further into an even more, it gave it an even greater gritty flair, a flair of realism, and a nice darkly twisted ironic slant, a real twisting of the dagger in the back. So it's his cynicism and the biting irony that he could inject into things is what really just hooked me as a kid. And I've never been able to get away from my Wilder obsession, because he is one of the great iconic geniuses in the great pantheon of motion picture artistry, one of the greatest directors who ever lived, and does not get the credit he deserves. So I'm really excited to tackle this. And again, anytime I can find a good Wilder book, I'm very happy. So that does it for alphabetical subjects. Now we get into specific subjects or just more general texts and things like that. This next one I've read a portion of before, but when I saw the whole big hardcover of it just sitting there for 75 cents, it's like, was this put here with my name on it? Because I kind of feel like it was. So this is the big interview book from the AFI that George Stevens Jr. did. Interviews and conversations with great movie makers from the Golden Age. Believe there's a slimmed down version of this as well. I think maybe a second volume, if I'm remembering correctly. But this is a wonderful volume that, of course, just goes through and is compiled of various interviews that were conducted with so many great talents. Of course, the idea before, getting these stories down on paper before everybody started leaving us. But this is pretty much confined to, I believe it's pretty much all directors in this volume. Yeah, pretty much for the most part. But just to give you an idea, if this book is going to float your boat, each subject gets about 25 to maybe 45 pages, but just, running through the list. So you've got Harold Lloyd, Raoul Walsh, King Vidor, Fritz Lang, Frank Capra, Howard Hawks, James Wong Howe, Mervyn LeRoy, Ruben Mamoulian, George Folsey, William Wyler, George Stevens, William Clothier. You've got Hitchcock, of course. Cucor's in here. Billy Wilder's in here. John Huston. Ray Bradbury's in here as well. Elia Kazan, Fred Zinnemann, David Lean, Stanley Cortez, Robert Wise, Ernst Lehman, Gene Kelly, Richard Brooks, Stanley Kramer, Hal Wallace, Jean Renoir. Fellini's in here, Bergman's in here, and then Satyajit Ray is in here. So it does kind of get into, some of the, titans of foreign cinema. You've got some of the great cinematographers of the Golden Age, some of the masters of light. You've got Ernst Lehman in here, who's one of the great screenwriters, and then Ray Bradbury's in here as well. That seems to be sort of the odd man out, but of course, Bradbury's always interesting to hear his views. I've always enjoyed hearing his views when he talks, literally when he would talk about the movies and his love of movies. So again, I've read this, or at least a chunk of this before, but it's a really thick volume, and it's got the fancy cut edges and things on the pages. So it's completely in interview style form, so it's just the question italicized and then the whole big block of text as your answer. But for Hitchcock or Wilder completists, you've got to have this. But also, it's really great that it has some of the great geniuses that don't often get covered. So you've got, a Raoul Walsh in here. You've got, John Huston in here. And of course, John Huston was fascinating if he scratched the side of his nose. So, and then of course, you've also got Fred Zinnemann, and you've got a section from Hal Wallace in here. And, Hal Wallace being, potentially the greatest producer of Hollywood's golden age, he probably knew more than anything about motion pictures, than practically anybody. So this is a really fantastic volume. Again, I'm very excited to be able to go back and reread it. So definitely worth your time if you stumble across a copy. Now, this one was one of the ones that was slightly more expensive at a whopping $2.50. And for a book from the McFarland Printing Company, that's crazy. McFarland is, very renowned in film circles for making extensively well-produced books on motion pictures, and usually facets or characters or figures that are not often covered, and definitely not into this level of detail. So normally their books are very pricey, which is why I usually just read a library copy when I finally find it. Otherwise, I can't possibly afford, $50, $60, $70, $80 or more for a single volume. So lo and behold, this one turned up, and it's in a book entirely on the effects work of science fiction and horror films of the 1950s and into the 60s. So like most McFarlane books, it doesn't have a dust jacket. It has, it looks, pretty much like a bound library copy, but it's got the really nice binding and everything. And it's very solid. And, it kind of looks slim, but that's very deceptive because this book is actually quite long. So it's on the really nice, glossy sort of photo paper stock. So this is definitely, much more from an archival standpoint, pretty much as all McFarlane books are. Just to give you an idea of how many stills are packed in here and how well they're done. So right here in the introduction, you've got a behind-the-scenes shot of the iconic giant squid from Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is one of the most iconic effects moments in 1950s cinema. Trying to get the glare off. And of course, there's so much glare on these pages because, again, this is premium, glossy paper stock. So these books are definitely, they don't pop up in used bookstores. That's why I was stunned to find this. But this is really extensive, as most McFarlane books are, and clocks in, let me make sure I get this right, clocks in at almost 400 pages. So it definitely runs the gamut and has loads of fantastic imagery. And here on this page, where it's talking about stage usage, so here you have a shot of good old Gilsey there from Creature from the Black Lagoon, and just beautifully printed on here. Immediately opposite is an iconic shot of the ship from Forbidden Planet. So it does kind of tiptoe in both science fiction and horror in this volume. So I was just stunned to find this. So I've already started devouring this thing. Even if you're not a fan of all of these films, and I'm one who's definitely not into, enjoying stuff just because it's hokey or low budget or goofy or whatever. I do tend to really prefer the more intelligent of the 50s science fiction films, but I'm still fascinated by all of them. And this is just a wonderful volume. And again, I couldn't believe a McFarlane book was just sitting there for less than $3. So I was just like, again, this had my name on it, so I just was so excited to find one of these. I hope to find more, but again, the reason why I don't have any before this point is because they're so expensive. But of course, they're well worth their price point from the material contained within. The next two books deal, of course, with James Bond, and if there is a book dealing with James Bond, I have to read it or purchase it or reread it 10,000 times or add it to the reference shelf. So this one I was very surprised to find there because it's not very common. It was published in 2015. It's entitled Ian Fleming, a Personal Memoir by Robert Harling, who was a very close friend of Fleming's. They met in the early stages of World War II, actually wound up working together during the war, and then kept up a friendship and correspondence through the years afterward. So this is taking a much more intimate look at what Fleming was really like from someone who obviously knew him very, very well, and even has some of the correspondence they would share. And so basically, Harling was able to, in book form, give a much more detailed and three-dimensional portrait of what Fleming was really like as a person, with, his various, foibles and fears, desires, things like that. So I've already started this, and it's just fascinating. And again, not super common. This is actually a British printing, again from 2015. So I was very surprised to find this turn up there. Again, the McKay store, you never know what turns up there. That's why I refer to it as being a black hole. Just have a sticker on the back, so I guess maybe somebody had purchased this online from a used bookshop because it has somebody else's barcode on it. It does have a pretty nice photo section in the middle on nice glossy stock, so that's always fun when you get accompanying photos. This next one is a book I've been meaning to get for ages, and I kept putting it off because I was just waiting for the price to drop a little bit. But again, I'm set to devour this thing. This is another book by the same authors in a similar vein. These two guys were the ones who wrote the essential Star Trek books, The 50-Year Mission, which is actually a 2-volume oral history where it's conducted via it's hard to describe, but it's sort of in a round table interview style format where they use the primary sources as sort of quote blocks. So this is the book they put together for James Bond and the film series. This just came out recently, and it's very hard to find this hardcover version. Usually you find the paperback, and because this is such a thick volume, kind of helps having the hardback because you'll flip through this a lot over the years and be very easy to tear the paperback version. But just to give you an idea, this is what it looks like when you're reading it. So very much in the interview style, but this goes beyond what you get in the standard stuff. So there are some extra bits of material that you will get out of this, even if you're like me and you've read everything known to man about Bond, and listened to the DVD audio commentaries over and over and over again. And it's also nice because it's got others of the cast and crew who are not as often quoted, and because this is not an official Eon licensed product, it's not cleaned up or censored, or I should say censored, but usually the official stuff sticks to the positives, and you don't quite always get that full 360-degree view of events and things. So it's really nice to have this now. And again, it makes a great companion volume with their essential Star Trek books, 50-Year Mission, which I just devoured. Those were outstanding. So I've already started this. I know I have a habit of starting multiple books at the same time, but I've been meaning to get this, and they had it at an absurdly cheap price, and it was the hardcover and still had the dust jacket and everything. So definitely check this out. They've done same authors have done a number of other books in the same style, and I think they have more planned. So these are really great fun, and they're not super expensive, but sometimes they're not always carried by a lot of bookstores, which this one was kind of on and off, and so it was kind of hard to get for a little while, because I was just going to get a copy on eBay, but I was trying to find the hardcover instead of the paperback, and then lo and behold, it turned up at McKay, so go figure. This next one is another one, a very recent book, just came out last year in 2020. I've been dying to read it ever since I heard about it, but again, I wanted to try and find a hardcover and try to find one in good shape, and then it just turned up at McKay's, and I was like, what? So this is the Sam Wasson book, The Big Goodbye, which is all about Chinatown and being a gigantic Chinatown obsessive. This is a must. This gets into the prehistory, then the post-history, and then a little bit about Chinatown after 1974. Beautiful cover art, of course, taking Giddys with his iconic bandaged nose. I love the design of this. I love the dark red. It's a very textured cover. You can feel my fingers, going over it. So it has that rough texturing, which is just beautiful. So that's why I wanted to get a hardcover copy instead of the paperback. Just to give you an idea that this is definitely coming from the right place, and this is not just going to tell you the same stories that you've heard a million times. The opening has a photo with Jack and Robert Towne in the 1950s when they first knew each other before anybody was famous. And then most fitting for me because not only am I a Chinatown obsessive, but I am a Chandler diehard, and I think for me, without question, Chandler was the greatest writer who ever lived. So the fact that the book opens with a Chandler quote. So, of course, Chandler's spirit pervades pretty much all of what came to be known as neo-noir, although most people don't do it very well. That just made me love this book all the more. So this is essential for Chinatown fans. This is essential for fans of 70s cinema. It's really well done, and it's really cool that we're getting these individual volumes that go beyond just film analysis for iconic individual titles. So now we have this one on Chinatown. There was the one on High Noon a couple years ago. I think there's been one on The Searchers as well. And of course, there was that excellent book on The Wild Bunch just recently. So I hope this becomes a trend that keeps going, because it's fascinating getting these book-length studies on not just the film and its production and going into detail we've never gotten before, but the cultural impact as well. So essential book. This was a book I didn't know existed, and again, some of this stuff is available online, but I don't think all of it is, and certainly not collected in this way. And being a gigantic fan of Graham Greene, I was excited to find somebody had compiled his entire film criticism work. So these are reviews and essays and articles he wrote. Most people aren't aware he was a pretty important film critic and one of the few people earlier on to take film as an art form very seriously. So in that way, he sort of followed in the same footsteps of H.G. Wells much earlier, who was also a very early cinema diehard and cinema defender and promoter of the cinema as an art form. So, of course, Greene being one of the great writers of the 20th century, it's really fascinating to see him apply his great prose powers to advocating cinema as an art form. So this is a very hefty volume from Applause. Apparently they did a number of these film readers of various individuals and all of their film writing work, but this thing is very hefty, and it clocks in at over 700 pages. So I couldn't say no to this thing, and I couldn't believe that it was sitting there at McKay's, again, for 75 cents. So, again, that's why I have a problem when I go there, because I find too many great film books. But again, Greene was such a great writer, so I can't wait to dig into this further. I've read some of his works before in terms of some of his film articles, but this just seemed too fascinating to leave sitting there on the shelf. So I also picked up a handful of music books as well, and in my last books video, I showed that I found the U2 by U2 coffee table book sitting there at McKay's, and I'd read that book before, and it's a great coffee table book, but usually those are pricey, and they're made for display pieces. They're filled with tons of great photos, so you definitely don't expect to see a nice copy sitting around for $1.50. So I had not read this yet, and this is still kind of a pricey coffee table music book, but again, I saw it sitting there, and of course it's so big that it was sticking off the shelf sideways, and I'm like, wait a minute. So this is the Original 2000 printing, the hardcover from Chronicle Books of the Beatles anthology. Of course, this goes hand in hand with the anthology documentary series that was first on TV and then released on tape, Laserdisc, and DVD, and then the accompanying three, as you can see pictured here, the three anthology volumes of rarities and demos and B-sides that were released as well in the 1990s. So the book was done last, and because this came out in 2000, but it's a really hefty volume, nice silver cover. There's a little bit of wear on the dust jacket, and again, it's probably because it's so big, but this thing is massive and just stuffed with text. And like a lot of coffee table books, I guess the closest thing I could think of on this is maybe the Monty Python coffee table book, Pythons by Pythons, where it's a lot of information and it's text from the actual members. And as you see here, it's, the Beatles in their own words. And of course, that means everything from John was obviously, from older interviews and personal correspondence and things like that. Again, this is so big. I'm trying to show as much as I can, stuffed with images. So this is a full-on coffee table book. This is still in print, but it's still quite pricey because it's a big giant coffee table book. I think there is maybe a paperback version. Usually they come out with a paperback version a couple years later, which is a little cheaper, but usually the pages are smaller and it's not as fancy as the hardcover one. So this I've never gotten to read this, so I'm excited to finally be able to do so. But again, I couldn't believe this was sitting there, and again, it was $2. So again, I was like, I kind of have to have this at that price because again, I really want to read it. And again, finding one of these for $2, I was like, this is a misprint, right? And it was not. So there you go. Being a giant REM nerd, I had read this book before. I just never owned a copy. So this is the book Hello. I believe this is all a photo archive from the Around the Sun era in terms of tours. So this is like 04, 05, 06, somewhere around there. Beautiful jacket opening. And then again, not a lot of text, but it's like a lot of candid stuff. Just beautifully done. Nice photo glossy stock on the paper. So again, this is pretty much just a photo book, but just beautifully done. And of course, essential for all REM fans. I looked at this before, but just never owned a copy. So just very happy to finally pick this guy up. And then along a similar line, this is also another sort of live photo archive of shows and backstage and all kinds of stuff from of course this is more of a historical document of the band's career up to that point in the live arena, as it were. And again, another really huge big coffee table book, just sitting there for $1.50, and I'm like, why are you doing this to me? I don't have space for this stuff. So this is the 2004 book U2 Show, which is entirely about the band's live history. And this is career spanning. So from 1980 up to 2004, when they were embarking on the Vertigo tour for How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. So wonderful layout. Again, full-on coffee table book. It's quite heavy and hefty, so that's why I'm kind of struggling to get this all on camera and hold it up straight. But I couldn't believe this was sitting there, and full pictures, all broken up into sections. So here we have the early days, and A Boy Through War. And I really like the layout, and I love that it's chronologically laid out. And there is actually some text in here, so that's good. It's not just a gigantic coffee table book without actual text. So this was just really cool. I've heard about this book before, but I've just never read it. And usually I don't go out buying coffee table books because they're so expensive. And usually you read the text once and then you put it back on the shelf, and then it's just an overpriced display piece, and you just pull it off the shelf and look at some of the pretty pictures every once in a while. But I can't believe this was sitting there, and it's still in nice shape. again, these books having, such big dimensions, as you can see, usually the dust jackets get a little dinged up over time because they kind of slide around, and the books are heavy, so when you pick it up, you try not to, but usually the dust jackets get a little bit of creasing here and there, but it's in really nice shape, and the logo's embossed and everything. So this is a really nice piece for U2 fans, of course. So of course I grabbed it immediately. But I can't believe they put these coffee table books out for so super cheap. So yeah, I was just like, I gotta get this one too. So there I was like, I've just got one or two books, and all of a sudden I've got two big coffee table books. I'm like, oh crap. Because I leave McKay's and I look like this because my chin's up like this, and I'm carrying a giant stack of books out. I'm like, oh no, I've done it again. I've done it again. Where am I going to find space for all of these? I don't know. And then last but not least, I found two graphic novels, and these were both in the super cheap bin. So these were actually, a quarter each. So this one I'd wanted to get for a while. This is actually the comic adaptation of Mask of the Phantasm. But as you can see, it's in a small sort of I don't know what they call this, but it's literally not graphic novels. It's not trade paperback or trade graphic novel size. So this is a original. I believe this came out in '93 as the film tie-in, but I guess this was maybe done as a promo or a mail away or something. But it is the whole story. The pages inside are still nice, but because it's smaller, the spine is very, very tight. But again, I'd always wanted to get a copy of this, and usually you have to go on eBay and try and find it because it's Mask of the Phantasm. It usually is a little bit on the pricey side, but I'd always been curious to see the film in comic form, especially being a gigantic fan of tie-in novelizations. So this is really nice to find, and it's cool that it's in this variant smaller printing. And then also floating around in there, which I wasn't even aware this existed, but this is the first volume of the 2010 Die Hard Year One prequel comic. This is the collected trade graphic novel. This is written by Howard Chaykin, the famous comics writer who I primarily know from his 1980s Shadow run. But this I had no idea there was a Die Hard prequel comic. So, it's definitely, looks a bit on the modern side, but there are some sort of nods to it being, obviously set before the first film in 1988. But yeah, I just figured this would be an interesting read being a Die Hard fan. And again, it was, less than $1 sitting in a bargain bin. And I was like, I didn't know they put graphic novels and collected trades in here. So I was like, okay, I'll go for it. Why not? So that does it for this massive amount of books that I've picked up, and now I have just completely exploded my to-read shelf. And now the problem is finding the time to read all of these and finding the space for all of these, because as you can see, I'm already long since out of space. But it always pays to search your used bookshops, and of course this was like several different trips. It was not all at once because I have problems, but I do have to put stuff back because I can't physically carry it all out at once. But yes, the local McKay's books, if you ever have the chance to find one or stop by one, they do have several locations, and I know this kind of sounds like a plug for them, but they have incredible bargains on their books. And again, I have to repeat, most of these, the reason why I got all of these, most of these were less than $1, which I still find hard to believe. But they have insanely cheap prices on books, and for the most part, they're first printings and hardcovers with dust jackets and stuff. So yeah, that means I buy too many. So with that, hopefully you found some interesting books to look up and check out for yourself. I know everybody is starting to read more now that we're still in the middle of the pandemic, but that has caused people to finally pick up a book again, or give books a try that they never finished, or dust off the old copies on the shelf and things. So that is perhaps one positive, that it's gotten everybody to get off their phones and start reading books again. But anyway, definitely keep supporting your local local used bookshops. They could definitely use your business right now. I'm sure after us being still in the middle of a pandemic and with business still being tough for everybody all around. And keep reading print copies because there's nothing like having a physical book in your hands. As cheap and as fantastic as a e-reader or Kindle copy or PDF can be, it's never quite the same as having the physical printed copy in your hands. So with that, thank you so very much for watching and keep reading.